They are telling them, not only are you allowed to do it, but it's, as I said earlier, it's righteous to do it. Okay. Somehow these kids are rationalizing their reprehensible behavior as something else, whether it's, well, it's my turn now. I've been oppressed for so many years, so I get to do it. Or, well, they just happen to be a white supremacist, so I'm going to kick the shit out of them.
Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in today's episode, we're going to be further exploring some of the bad behavior that's going on out there in society. And in preparing for this podcast, I was really pondering, this, and we've spoken about this before, this increase in bad behavior. Are we just seeing it more, or is it truly happening? Is it truly becoming more permissible? And when it comes to young people, I think that historically there's been the idea that, young boys are up to mischief. And, we even know from a psychological perspective that mischief isn't necessarily a bad thing in small doses. But I think that there's a fine line between healthy mischief and some of the things that are going on out there in the world. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more in the news about young girls and young teen girls really getting into some major trouble. So we're going to watch a video about a recent case that's taken place in Toronto, and then we'll talk some more about it.
Chaos erupts in the middle of a school day when a fight breaks out in the hallways of Tommy Douglas Secondary School last Monday. 3 teens tell City News a group of students wanted to fight them. A girl in pink pants is thrown to the ground, kicked in the head 5 times. City News spoke with that 16-year-old. We are not naming any of the minors or their family members to protect their identity.
It's just devastating, honestly, because I don't even know the girls.
York Regional Police say 4 14-year-olds and a 15-year-old have been charged with assault in connection to a call at the school last Monday. The student sustained injuries, including bruising to her head and ribcage. She and her 17-year-old friend, who says she was also assaulted that day, warned the school this was coming.
And they said, we can't control the students in our school.
What did that tell you?
That told me that there's no safety.
Were these the same girls that had been threatening you for weeks?
Yes, it was her whole group, the whole group.
The same girls you warned the school about?
Yes. I went to multiple times, told them they're still doing this and stuff.
So the first thing that comes to mind here is, what do you mean the school said that there's nothing that we can do about this, right? And to tie this back to what we've spoken about in other episodes, the school is doing plenty about non-issues when it comes to the overemphasis on race and discrimination when it comes to math and science and whatever. There's plenty being done about that, but then there's real violence, real injury taking place, and they throw their hands up and say there's nothing that we can do. As a parent, that's the thing that stands out to me the most, is there's no excuse for that. Things happen, and if it was spontaneous, it's not okay, but okay, I can have, some understanding of it, but they were forewarned and yet nothing was done.
This video it's enraging. It touches upon so many points that we've talked about in other videos. And, people, we've spoken to so many teachers and principals, the good ones. The bad ones don't come to therapy, it doesn't seem, okay? The good ones do, because they've seen what has happened to a system, to a career, to a vocation that they've committed so much of their life to. And they've seen that they're being handcuffed. They're worse than handcuffed. They're being punished for trying to do anything to actually make things right. And I'm telling you right now, I don't care the color of the skin of the kids, of the teachers, whatever. If you have good teachers who can connect with students, who can be role models for those students. Again, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, your sex, anything like that. If you can really be a solid presence in their life, you have a chance to mitigate some of the horrible behaviors and attitudes that we're seeing. But those good teachers, they're burning out because there are way too many bad teachers out there, bad principals, bad trustees, school boards, and politicians. In Ontario especially, the provincial government has failed miserably. Okay, Stephen Lecce, sorry, but I don't know what the hell you're doing, but you're not doing your job. Doug Ford, I don't know what people expected from him, but especially when it comes to education, he is not delivering at all. Okay, and I think I'm allowed to say that. I think the records speak for themselves, and I think so many parents and teachers and everyone else can support what I'm saying. And one of the things that happened, though, when we talk about violence specifically, and I am going to name a name, Desmond Cole. He is an activist. He used to be on like certain, I think radio stations, and he's had positions. And I'm sure he has a good heart. But he advocated for no more police in the schools. He got the police taken out of schools because having police in the schools is racist. Right?
Yeah.
And we don't want to oversimplify the topic. And I understand there's probably going to be some, and I'm not justifying in any way, but I am sure that some, let's say, black students or brown students who are doing absolutely nothing or good kids, maybe were being profiled or targeted or harassed. There would be some. And I don't want to minimize their experience at all. I wish we could reduce that to zero, those kind of cases. But the fact is, there are far more, I believe, from what I've heard, this is only anecdotal, but from what I've heard directly and from others who have worked with these kids, there are far more black and brown students who feel worse without the police in their schools, like if you're talking dangerous areas, than who felt targeted. They felt safer. They were glad. And, whether it's their physical safety every day, or just they have the insight to say, it looks really bad on us when a whole bunch of kids who have the same color, skin, or cultural backgrounds as we do are acting like horribly. I'm not that person. Yeah. They don't define me. Yet that's all the news that we're seeing is kids like that. And then I get tarnished with the same brush. I want to have systems in place to prevent that from happening, so good kids can flourish and show that it's not about the color of your skin. It's about attitude. It's about parenting. It's about, there's so many things. And let's be clear, in some cases, there are generation after generation after generation of people, especially when it comes to First Nations and Indigenous and Métis individuals who, because of horrible histories, right, it got passed on over and over and over. And still to this day, we are seeing the discrimination. And I'm hoping that somehow we can find a solution. But in some cases, we can pinpoint, we can say, this is why certain families have been broken for generation upon generation upon generation. We can say it's actual systemic racism or some kind of horrors. But for many other cases, teachers, politicians, school boards, etc., are just automatically saying, well, it's white supremacy, it's colonialism. That's what's causing the problem, without even knowing these kids' backgrounds, without knowing the family and so on. And it's allowing parents to wash their hands and go, not my fault. My kid's a terrible, student. They're violent. They're doing all this stuff. They're disrupting, they're ruining the lives of every other kid around them. Not my fault. Thank you very much. Yeah. For everyone who's promoting these narratives.
And ironically, that's racist, right? To make those assumptions that, these students feel uncomfortable around the police because of this, that, and the other history. And again, I too am not denying the history that exists, but you can't make that assumption that just because they look a certain way, they therefore think the police are evil. And I remember in one of the DEI groups that I was working with, this was a very unpopular opinion, and I still fail to see the problem with what I said. But being an individual who works with so many first responders and so many kind, amazing human beings that I've worked with who are police officers, perhaps what's at hand instead is helping these groups who have this discomfort around police and first response, providing them with more education about what the police does and who they are, and connecting these two communities with one another. I got a lot of flack for suggesting that, but again, there's a lot of assumption that's happening here that is in fact more damaging than what they claim to be trying to prevent or resolve.
Yes, and I don't want to get in trouble, but I guess you're no longer with that group, okay? But for any DEI group or any group whatsoever, to deny the fact that, and this research has shown this, if you have bad relations between different quote unquote groups, if you have bad perceptions of the other group, the best way to fight that is to bring them together. I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts. You bring them together in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. And
a healthy, safe way.
Structured way. And for anyone to deny that is, again, denying reality. They're allowing their ideological capture or possession, ignorance, whatever self-serving motives they have, whatever mental, psychological, or emotional weaknesses that they have, they're allowing that to overrule logic. Right. And yes, if you have a white police officer with a bunch of black students, for example, and that white police officer, you get the right ones, you educate them, you make sure that they are racially sensitive, you make sure, right, that they are the best for that position. You put them in that position, you let kids talk to them one-on-one, you let the cop talk to those kids and let them see they're not some white devil, they are just a human being trying to do their job, trying to do the best that they can do for society, for the kids, for everybody else. Again, you got to get the right people there. And then ideally, you would also have a bunch of black officers and say, hey, right? And what happens when you have a black officer? What are those black officers called when they're trying to, to maintain a system so that everyone is safe and secure? But what are they called? Uncle Tom, sellouts. Okay. They're called all the horrible racist names because people can't imagine that these black officers would somehow buy into this white supremacist system. No, how about this officer saying, this is my community, this is my city, this is my country, and I want this to be the best functioning it can be. And the way to do that is you make change from within. You get in there and you be the best person that you can be in your position. And you just show everybody else that whatever prejudices you have, whatever misconceptions you have, you know what, maybe they're wrong because I'm living proof that, I am not the way that you see me or that you want to see me. And you start there, and that's how you start to change prejudice. And how many of these DEI people or these other ones, like Desmond Cole and others, how many people are taking this rational, sensible, proven approach to trying to change the problem or to fix the problems? They're not. And that's why we're seeing that these problems are only getting worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the video in particular and the topic of, and I guess I feel like we're doing a lot of prefacing here, but I will say not that anybody should be behaving this way, but this increase in females engaging in this very aggressive, physically aggressive behavior, that is not typical of women and young women. Females tend to be more aggressive with reputation damage and their words and gossip and so on. So it's interesting to see an increase in this type of behavior. Just last year, also in Toronto, there was a group of 5 girls about the same age who killed a homeless man. They I don't know all the details of it, but they basically stabbed the man to death. And they did not, based on the interviews that I read, did not appear to have a terrible amount of remorse or empathy or even understanding of what they did. And with this video in particular, we don't know what the aftermath was, but I imagine there's probably some similarity there, at least with a lack of understanding or empathy of what in fact they were doing to this victim. And I don't use this term with hyperbole or exaggeration, but this is psychopathic behavior. And then what comes to mind regarding females is I think it's less than 1% of the female population actually meets diagnostic criteria for psychopathy. So it's not that, or at least there's a low likelihood of all of these psychopathic women coming together and banding together and committing these aggressive crimes. So it begs the question, what is contributing to this? Social media is probably part of it because there's sensationalizing of this type of behavior. Lack of proper parenting is probably part of it. Over permissiveness in the school system, in parenting, in the legal system as well. But there's so many complex layers to this as far as frankly, what the hell's going on? This is not okay. This is not typical behavior.
Right. A few things. So I got called out by somebody on X a few months ago. And she does research. She says, I know she's written books on the topic. And I told her that from what I know, what I've seen and what I've heard, that to your point, that female violence is increasing. And she's like, well, show me the stats. She doesn't believe it. Okay. She takes a science-based approach to everything. And we had a bit of a discussion. And I think we agree on most issues, she and I. But, she disagreed with this notion that there's an increase in violence. And again, maybe it's because we're seeing more of it on social media. But from everything I've heard, speaking to so many people, parents, the students themselves, Okay, I have to believe that that there is an increase in female violence. I certainly believe there is. And one thing that I've heard people saying was that, and here we go, we've got to be careful here, but within certain pockets of society, that violence was always there. It was contained to those pockets. And whether we're talking about racial groups, okay, or more, the people will say it's racial groups, but it's a correlation. In most cases, and we talked about this in another podcast, it's socioeconomic status, right? So again, I want to be clear here. I'm not making any racial comments. I'm saying that in certain socioeconomic groups, female violence is more tolerated, it's more promoted, it's more acted on. So, and if it happens to correlate with colors of skin, then so be it. But I'm not saying it's the color of skin per se. It's a culture. And the culture, culture comes from different places. And one of them is from your socioeconomic status. Okay. The neighborhood. Right. That's culture. Okay. So I do believe that, that obviously that violence always existed there, but we just weren't seeing it because we weren't immersed in that. Right. And I do believe, though, that that's spreading now to, to other socioeconomic groups as well. Right. To the middle class and above. OK. And because, as you said, historically, females have always used reputational damage to hurt people and other types of, we know this, psychological damage, not physical, but we're seeing the physical. So, and the thing is this. The proper way to study this would be to get a lot of good research that's not ideologically driven, right? That's being done in a disinterested, which does not mean uninterested, disinterested in a scientific, objective, neutral, third-party, arm's reach fashion with no narrative to be promoted. All we're doing is collecting data. Yeah. And to do that, though, you are going to have to collect data with regard to the person's color of the skin, sex, and also, most importantly, socioeconomic status. That's what we're really looking for. Yeah. Okay.
Because that's good research. We have to have those demographic details.
We need those.
That's just the way it
is. Exactly. And again, if it's, and I forgot to say this in another podcast, when I was talking about this kind of research, which is anytime you try to do that research, well, why do you want to know? Well, because we're critical thinkers and we're trying to find solutions. We're not trying to say, aha, I told you so, it's because of this or that. We're saying, let's find out. And if we find out it's because of the color of the skin or something else, the most important question, I did talk about this in the previous podcast, is let's find out why. Okay. Maybe that's just an illusory effect. Maybe, again, I believe in most cases it is the socioeconomic status, the culture that's associated with that. That's the most prominent. But when you talk about all these factors, okay, social media, we can't deny that that's what kids are seeing. They're seeing this normalized. They're seeing it glamorized. They're seeing people get street cred from doing this, and they're seeing no consequences. That's the problem. They're not seeing consequences, and the consequences aren't being enacted because racism. It's racist. It's ridiculous. And if you don't believe us, please. Go on to X, type in the keywords or type in Chanel Fowl, PFAHL, and see the kind of stuff that she's exposing. She's not the only one. Others are exposing the types of ideologies that are being promulgated in the school system. And it starts not just in the school, it starts in teachers' college. It starts in university before that these nonsensical, not fact-oriented or fact-based narratives are being, inculcated, or the students are being inculcated. The students being the teachers to be, are being inculcated with this. And then finally, then I'll get off my soapbox for a second. And then finally, when we talk about no consequences and everything, right? And again, people might think it's overly simplistic. We're not saying it's only these things. We're saying these are definitely factors. And we've talked about this in other podcasts as well. When people, and it doesn't matter your sex, sexual orientation, color of your skin, it doesn't matter. Okay. This is part of the human condition. And it's so obvious you don't need me to say it, but I'm going to say it. When an individual or a group of people are told that you are special, whether you're noble or whether you are marginalized and oppressed or whatever else, but you are special and you're untouchable. You deserve to have special treatment. You deserve to be able to get away with certain things because you've had all these either terrible things happen to you or because you're special without even knowing if that's true, just because of something that you are born with or a certain way that you're feeling. Okay. Because of that, you have special status. If you tell that to anybody, regardless of color, the skin, sex, whatever else like that, they are all going to act, or almost everybody is going to act in the same way. They are not going to say, oh, I have this special right and privilege and power and so on, so I'm going to use this for the good of society. No, people are self-serving. They are going to believe that they can get away with anything. And that's one of the main reasons we're seeing such an uptick in this type of reprehensible behavior, whether it's outright violence like we saw, or whether it's students just yelling at teachers with impunity, whether it's tearing down posters, whether it's not allowing people to speak and so on. They believe that they are righteous and that they have a right to do what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to tie together two of the ideas there, social media, I feel like we sound like old people sometimes. We're like, oh, social media, it's so bad. But truly it is promoting a lot of this. And we've spoken before about the idea of self-interest. All humans to an extent are self-interested. But I think part of the problem here in particular is that social media is promoting this hyper degree of self-interest and self-focus. And it's all about me, which in turn, I do think over time is diminishing the capacity for people to have true empathy for people and recognizing that a person on the screen isn't the same as a person in real life. And yet something's not connecting or computing in the brain. And I don't think that people are recognizing, young people are recognizing, like when you're in real life, there's a certain way that you are expected to behave and treat people. But that, again, that capacity has just been so significantly diminished by this constant exposure to these things on social media since the youngest of ages.
Yeah. And again, it's normalizing this type of thing. There's a few things. So one is normalizing. Two, parents have thrown up their hands and saying, well, what can I do about it? Or those parents are part of the groups that are being told, you are special, it's not your fault, etc. So they don't feel that personal responsibility to say, I want to raise my kid to be a decent citizen. Right. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, I talked about this in another podcast. That's going to be the drinking word game, the drinking game word, for every podcast. I said there's another podcast, but I'm not going to say this time. I'm not going to make it.
But there's so much overlap, right? There's so much overlap in what we talk about.
And it needs to be said over and over because people aren't getting the message. But the fact is, and people really need to understand this, when you talk about this disconnect between, let's say, virtual and reality, the bridge between the two is the phone. And so when you see these terrible things happening, people aren't looking at the poor victim getting pummeled. They're whipping out their phone and they're seeing it on the screen. It's a crazy illusion.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But that just, again, it's believe it or not, and people think that it can't happen. It can happen. That's how irrational.
No, because in real life, they're watching it on the phone because they're recording it. I didn't even consider that. Yeah.
And again, and they're not, And so it takes them away. It makes them just a pure spectator. And if you're a spectator in person watching someone and you see make the eye contact and you see the pain and everything like that, that can have an effect on you. But when you're doing this because I'm recording and whatever else like that, you're removing yourself from that. And you said earlier about the psychopathic behavior or the levels of psychopathy. Obviously, we're not having literal psychopaths. But when you think about what psychopathy is, the cornerstone of psychopathy is the lack of regard, lack of conscience, the ability to do things without compunction. And we are teaching that to kids. So this might be the first time in history where such a large group of kids that you wouldn't normally expect. There are certain contexts where if a child is made into a child soldier, if some poor kid is taken from the youngest of ages and made to kill their dog or a neighbor or the family member, you can make them into sociopaths. Right. But that's a special context. We are seeing a bunch of kids being made into not literal, but quasi psychopaths or sociopaths, through this type of for everything that we're talking about. And when you talk about the focus on the self, me, if I feel a certain way, I should be able to act out on it. I'm just expressing myself. I'm just, and not only am I expressing myself, but because of these people, kind of people that we're talking about, the people in positions of power, the people who've been asleep at the wheel, the people who've been actually promulgating the worst types of belief systems, they are telling them not only are you allowed to do it, but it's, as I said earlier, it's righteous to do it. Okay. Somehow these kids are rationalizing their reprehensible behavior as something else, whether it's, well, it's my turn now. I've been oppressed for so many years, so I get to do it. Or, well, they just happen to be a white supremacist, so I'm going to kick the shit out of them or something like that. Wait, the person's black. Doesn't matter. They're white supremacists because right? People have this horrible capacity to rationalize. I've said this so many times, rationalize, but just so people understand, rationalize as in psychology, as a defense mechanism, is to make cheap excuses for why you do or don't do something. Okay, it's not a good thing, right? So people are justifying the worst, the worst unjust behaviors in the craziest of ways, and the powers that be, whether it's social media, influencers, teachers, the government, right? They are giving them all the tools to be able to rationalize in the craziest of ways, because these are the narratives that they're learning. Okay? Again, if you come from this group, you're marginalized, therefore you get to do whatever you want, free pass, and all those other people, they're the bad people.
So back to the point you made about the phones, I love that point so much, and I'm like connecting a whole bunch of dots right now as we're talking about this. So, and it's funny that a lot of my basic psychology knowledge is coming to mind because I think that it's so applicable. But I think about the bystander effect, where if nobody is jumping in and nobody is doing anything, that obviously is a problem. And the way that bystanders, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting this, but if the bystanders are looking around and nobody is acting, then they're going to be less likely to act as well. So I think that this is being compounded with with these phones and everybody watching. Because everybody is there's this additional layer, I guess, of being an observer and being a bystander, which in turn is going to further reduce the likelihood of somebody actually intervening and helping. And I think that ties into this idea of self-interest as well, because people are whipping out their phones so they can record, so they can post, that they can go viral, so they can get the likes, and they can whatever is motivating them to post this. So not only is there an issue of self-interest with the attacker in that situation, but I think also with the people observing.
100%. And yes, so the bystander effect, there are different phenomena going on. One is the diffusion of responsibility, the assumption that, well, there's so many people, someone's going to step in. Okay. But that's the first part. But the second part, exactly what you said. And this has been shown time and time again. If there are 10 people or 100 people or whatever, all it takes is one person to intervene, and then others do. Okay, that's how the human brain. Okay, we are we monkey see, monkey do, right? And so again, as you said, if everyone's whipping out their phone, that's what everybody else is doing. And so there's less and less of a chance that at least one person is going to jump in to help, as opposed to jumping in and ganging up on them, which we see as well, unfortunately. Okay, same idea. You get a bunch of you get a mob, and for anyone who wants to say we're trying to make any statements about any the color of the skin or whatever else like that, we're not saying that. We're talking about the human condition. If you imbue this narrative with racism, guess what? That's a projection of your own racism. Okay. We are talking about the human bloody condition, which is, right, that we are social animals. So when we see a group of people doing one thing, we're likely to do it as well. And once again, and by the way, the fact is, there are very few heroes among us. If everyone's running one direction, if the 1,000 people are running one direction away from the danger, there will be maybe one person at most, maybe two, who will run toward the danger. Okay, those are the heroes. Those are the people that you've dealt with and I've dealt with, and the first responders and so on, right? We need those people in society, which ironically these days, so many of them are getting shit on because the first responders, the police and everything, right? They are the ones who are getting shit on. So we're even reducing the numbers of them. All these factors, there's so many of them, and I'm going to use these people's words against them. There's so many intersecting factors, okay, that are helping explain the deterioration in society. And we're not speaking with hyperbole. We're not coming up with, it might sound overly simplistic, but we're saying it's not the only factor, but we need to take these into consideration, that the models, the heroes, the ones who are the likely ones to run into danger. Okay. We are shitting all over them. We're making it less likely that they're going to want to do their job because we're handcuffing them. We're punishing them for doing their job, and an increasingly impossible job, as we've discussed in some of the other videos that we show. Right. Those are the special cases. Those are the ones who run toward danger. But if there's 100 people, or 10 people or whatever, and it's not a burning building. It's not, it's not, I don't know, like terrorists coming. It's just a bunch of kids fighting. And, all it takes is one person to kind of jump in to try to intervene. That's not the same hero situation. But again, even then, most people won't do it because people are self-interested. They don't want to put themselves in danger. But again, among normal people, there will be, one or two people They don't have to be heroes, but they're just more action oriented, and they're going to intervene. And once again, normally that would make other people do it as well. That's how humans operate, right?
Yeah.
But if those heroes now, or the non-heroes or the whatever, are whipping out their phones as well, right? Who's going to stop it? And there was a story. Was it a story? Okay. Well, like, teachers are less likely to get involved now, right, to try to stop things, because they're afraid of, parents coming and suing them and things, lawsuits and or being called racist or something like that. Again, I'm sorry to keep bringing that up, but that's what we're hearing, right? When these are not factors, or shouldn't be considered factors, but they are being it, because the people supposedly in charge, they're not just asleep at the wheel; they're drunk at the wheel.
And let's even just entertain for a second that, okay, fine, maybe race, ethnicity, these factors, maybe they do play some role. Okay, just for argument's sake. But just because it's an explanation doesn't mean it's an excuse. And I think that's the biggest problem here, is that, you and I aren't denying the fact that there are factors that may play a role in influencing certain behaviors, but it doesn't excuse it. It doesn't make it okay. And it doesn't mean that we can just dust our hands of it and move on and say, well, they're brown, so, that's going to happen. Because again, like we said before, that's racist.
Exactly. And I say this to so many people, so many different factors. I say, as you just said, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. Let's start with the explanation, because with the explanation comes potential solutions, right? With excuses comes nothing, with explanations.
Yeah.
And again, unfortunately, too many researchers are afraid, for good reason, to do the proper research. And even if they want to, the ones who are brave enough to do it, they get stymied at the institutional level, because they say, well, we're not going to allow this to happen, because it's racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this type of stuff is happening literally in your community, right? So it's not like this is something that we're seeing is happening in, some remote place in the US or whatever. This is literally happening in the community that you live in. So I think it's really important for us to focus on, what can parents do, even what can students do. And again, it's just such a complex, layered issue that I don't think that there's a singular answer or singular action that people can do. But I would say, with regard to students, I think to an extent it does start there, where students need to be better educated and equipped to be able to modulate their temper, I suppose, is the first piece of it. Develop a stronger sense of empathy, have the bravery to, if not intervene, because that could be a safety issue, do something, or, engage with authorities. If nothing is happening at the school level, talk to your parents, see if authorities can get involved. But I would say, as an important first step, is better equipping students.
And it's difficult. Students are students. But when you talk about modulating, tempers and so on, well, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's breathing, right? Whether it's just better self-esteem, right? Like, these are things that students can be taught in school. And I think from the youngest of ages. Now, mindfulness is not for everybody. Okay. And I would, if someone tried to teach me mindfulness as a kid, I would have laughed at them. Okay. It's just not my style, even though I tell everyone, if you can do it, it's great. But breathing, simple breathing, learning how to breathe properly. You can teach that from the youngest of ages. Okay. That's one. And the second, again, we've talked about this so many times, no matter what we say, no matter what a teacher says, all of that gets just wiped out in a second if peers are sending a different message, whether those peers are in front of their faces or more likely on social media. So we have to understand that it's an uphill battle, but we can't just, deny our responsibilities. We can't abdicate our responsibilities as parents or educators or whoever else, or mental health professionals. And, we have to say, let's find a way to fight it. So yes, helping students is one way. But really, students should be shaped by the parents in a healthy way. So parents, I know it's difficult, but especially when it comes to this, I get other issues we've talked about. I can understand parents are terrified, going, oh, how can we deal with this without being called the worst things in the world? When it comes to school violence, you're going to find
it's pretty basic. I feel like most parents would agree that's a problem.
Exactly. Now, out of 10 parents in these days, you're going to find 1 or 2 parents who are going to pull the racist card. Okay. But the majority, and they'll be the loudest usually, and they might be of a certain race, quote unquote race. And so you might be afraid to challenge them. don't be afraid. Okay. Find enough people who have common sense, who have decency, and who say, no, we're going to band together. We're going to take it to the school and the school board and go on social media and find reporters or other people who have a bigger voice than them, who are willing to take up your cause, because they are willing, right? Whether they're doing it because they want to help promote society, or whether they're doing it because they're going to get a lot of clicks, it doesn't matter. They will help you expose bad teachers, bad principals, bad trustees and school boards. And they will do it. They'll gladly do it. Because again, I don't care what the motives are. If you're able to do that, if you're able to expose these practices, like at this school. Now, we haven't heard all the story yet, but again, let's just remind what the people heard at the beginning of that video, which, by the way, the closed caption for that video was there were some big mistakes. Like in one place, the school said, we can't control, and the thing said can control. So the people were just reading, you got the wrong message. Okay. I'm glad at the very beginning, you actually addressed it without even knowing. Okay. But you did address, right? So in that video, please keep in mind, those kids went to the teachers. I think they went to the principal as well before, and moments before. Everyone involved there should lose their jobs on the spot, unless there's if it's like, I should be very clear.
Unless there's a real reason that something prevented them from acting. But if it truly was a matter of absolute inaction, then
they should not be around students. Okay. That's not a suspension. You lose your job, because those kids got the crap beat out of them. And now they're going to be traumatized. And if it's like most other situations, or many other situations, we're going to find out that the students who were victimized, they're the ones who are going to have to go to a different school, not the kids who did the terrible behavior. And as the kids said, they didn't even know them. They just chose them. They targeted them. You have to make sure that kind of behavior that there's zero tolerance. And we used to have a thing called zero tolerance policy. That's racist, apparently.
It seems to have faded away. Yeah.
Okay. Because too many people from certain groups. Okay. And once again, if that's the case, let's find out why that is. Is it sociocultural? Right. Is it parenting? Is it culture? And again, when I say culture, I want people to understand culture. Again, if you assume that culture is all racial, then you're a racist. Culture is, again, look at the definition. It can be any type of, community group, whatever else like that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. And again, so back to the whole thing is, you band together and you let the teachers, you let the principals know that you're not going to stop, and they don't want to be exposed. Okay. Like I said, there are people who will expose them, and it's sad that we have to go this route. But these days, again, it's back to the human condition. I've helped so many people in different contexts. I won't go because of confidentiality, but I used to always say I still say to the people I help, I say that the people that you're dealing with, the reason they're acting with impunity is because they believe that there's no oversight. They believe they're operating an insulated little bubble, or whatever else like that. As soon as you poke a hole and you go, no, there's someone who's watching, and they're going to expose you. Now the behavior changes, not because they're better people, but because of self-interest. They don't want to be exposed. So please, parents, get together, and teachers as well. This is the hardest thing. I get it. Work behind the scenes. Find ways. If you know that there are parents who are concerned, okay, give them resources. Give them you yourselves find this contact and say, look, you didn't hear from me, but here, check out this person. They will take it. I can't myself because, I'm handcuffed, but you can as a parent. You can do that. And as a parent, you should want to do that. And, if people think that we're out of touch, I've got a 26-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 14-year-old. Okay. So for many years, I've watched them go through the system. I've been involved in the school system, and each of us has many, we have many patients who either are students or are parents of students. So, we're talking from experience, we're talking from knowledge, and we're talking from compassion. We want to make a safer learning environment for these students. They shouldn't be terrified to go to school.
Exactly. And I guess I'll add to that too, to parents, don't be afraid to take legal action if it's warranted, right? Because that, again, sometimes is making enough noise for something to happen. And I think a lot of parents are afraid to go that route, or don't want to, rattle the cage too much, but this is your child. So in my opinion, if that is a legitimately warranted route, take it.
Definitely. The legal action, whether it's against the school, whether it's against the kids or the parents of the kids, right? And yes, I understand that money is a big issue, but if you do your due diligence, you will find that there are law firms who will take these cases, on contingency. They don't get paid until you get paid. And if you're not the type of personality who will do that, again, find somebody, whether it's a family member, a friend, or another parent who is more willing and capable of doing these things. Because I get it. I know it sounds so easy on the ground, and again, having 3 daughters, I haven't had to go the legal route. But I have spoken to many teachers, principals, and so on, and trustees, and I've pushed. And when I didn't see action, I kept pushing. And I was prepared to go to the end. I was prepared to go to the media if I needed to. Fortunately, they resolved it before it got that far. But I was prepared. You find the person, who's willing to do that if it's not you.
So to our listeners, leave comments about what you think about all the things we talked about today: female aggression, psychopathic behavior, empathy. Is race more of a factor than we seem to think it is? Leave us your comments, and we'd love to see what you think.
All right. And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.